You know, the United States is this massive global superpower, right? But its history isn't some peaceful storybook. Not at all. It's a story of a nation that was literally forged in the fires of conflict. And this explainer, we're going to boil that huge, complicated history down to its essential story.
People often call the United States a modern Roman Empire, and you can see why. But how did it get to this point? Its beginnings are anything but simple. They're actually rooted in centuries of really brutal conflict, conquest, and eventually a war against itself.
So how was this giant forged in fire? Well, to really understand the America we see today, we've got to look at three huge defining conflicts: a war of creation, a war of definition, and a war for its very soul.
Okay, so the first great conflict was all about creation. It started with the raw struggle to just survive in a brand new world, and it ended with a violent, bloody break from the most powerful empire on the planet.
You know, it all started pretty slowly. After Columbus, it took more than 150 years for European powers to really get a solid foothold. You had Spain, France, and England all scrambling to claim a piece of the pie, and they were all there for wildly different reasons. Some were chasing gold, others were seeking God.
And this is just fascinating. Right at the heart of the colonies, you have this huge contrast. On one side, there's Jamestown. It was purely a business deal, a get-rich-quick scheme. On the other side, you've got Plymouth, a community built entirely on religious ideals. This tension, this pull between money and faith, plus all the conflicts with powerful Native American groups, meant the colonies were pretty much in a constant state of war.
This simmering conflict? Well, it finally just blew up into a full-blown global war. And Britain's victory was absolute. They literally kicked France off the entire continent. But that victory came with a massive price tag. And to pay for it, Parliament looked to the one place it could squeeze for cash: its American colonies. So one tax after another gets slapped on them, all without any colonial say-so. That famous cry, "No taxation without representation," wasn't just a catchy slogan, it was a firestorm. With every new law, every violent protest, the tension just kept building and building until in 1775, it finally just snapped.
And there it was, on a small town green in Massachusetts. A single shot set a rebellion in motion. The war for independence was on.
But, you know, winning a war is one thing. Building a nation, that's a whole other beast. And that brings us to the second big conflict, a struggle over definition, as this brand new United States was forced to deal with the massive contradictions baked into its very foundation.
I mean, come on, these are some of the most powerful and beautiful words ever written. But, and this is a huge but, this new empire of liberty, as Thomas Jefferson himself called it, was built on a really brutal and undeniable hypocrisy.
Because, let's be real, from the very beginning, the nation's entire economy was tangled up in the absolutely grotesque business of buying and selling human beings. The wealth that built the cities, that funded the revolution itself, was squeezed from the labor of enslaved people. It was a system that treated human beings like cargo.
And as the nation started pushing west, they had this idea, this banner called Manifest Destiny. It was this belief that they had a God-given right to the whole continent. But what did that mean in practice? It meant waging war and forcibly removing the people who were already living there. The Trail of Tears wasn't some tragic accident. It was official U.S. government policy.
And here's the crucial thing. This massive contradiction wasn't just fading away. No way. The institution of slavery, which had been around since 1619, was actually growing exponentially. It was getting bigger, more entrenched, and more profitable with every passing decade. This was a moral time bomb, just ticking away, waiting to detonate.
And that brings us to the third, and honestly, the most violent conflict of them all, the battle for the nation's soul, where that time bomb finally went off. For decades, you see Congress trying to juggle this thing, trying to keep the peace by balancing the number of free states and slave states. But every so-called compromise was really just a band-aid, kicking the can down the road and making both sides even angrier. By the 1850s, the compromises just weren't cutting it anymore, and Kansas literally exploded into a mini-civil war, a bloody preview of what was to come. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860? That was it. That was a breaking point. Even though he promised he wouldn't touch slavery where it already was, the fact that he was against it spreading was enough. The South saw the writing on the wall, and that house, divided against itself, finally started to collapse.
On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired on a federal fort in Charleston Harbor, Fort Sumter.
The American Civil War, the nation's bloodiest, most defining conflict, had begun.
The 4 years that followed were just horrific, pitting brother against brother, family against family. But key Union victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg in 1863 really turned the tide. And with the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln officially changed the whole point of the war. It wasn't just about saving the Union anymore, it was about creating a new birth of freedom.
The Union was saved. Slavery was abolished. But just 5 days after the surrender, the architect of that victory was assassinated. The nation's leader was gone right at the moment the incredibly hard work of rebuilding was supposed to begin.
With the war finally over, you'd think the fighting was done. Nope. The battle for America's soul just entered a new phase. The era that came next, which we call Reconstruction, was this brief, really radical, and totally revolutionary attempt to remake the South and, for the first time, secure the rights of 4 million newly freed people. And the government, to its credit, moved fast to try and make that promise real. In just 5 years, 3 massive constitutional amendments were passed to fundamentally rewrite what it meant to be an American citizen. For the very first time, those famous words, "all men are created equal," actually had the force of federal law behind them.
But this incredible promise of equality was met with just ferocious, violent resistance. And in 1877, a shady, backroom political deal, the Compromise of 1877, basically brought it all crashing down. Federal troops were pulled out of the South, and that effectively abandoned African Americans to a new, brutal system of racial oppression called Jim Crow. So, the nation was reborn from the ashes of the Civil War, but its founding promise remained tragically, painfully unfinished. The fires of conflict had forged a powerful nation, for sure, but they also left behind this massive, echoing question that would define the next century and beyond. A promise of equality was made. When was it finally kept?